Well, good morning, everybody. As you all are coming in, I'm excited to see the attendee number going up and up and up. So we'll get started fairly shortly. Let everyone find their virtual seat. If you haven't already, go ahead and grab that freshly brewed cup of coffee or tea, a glass of orange juice, or if you're one of those interesting people who start their day with a nice, refreshing glass of cold water. Uh, Go ahead and grab that so that we can join our conversation in the most comfortable way that we can.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's coffee.
Cheers, everyone. I've got my
Yeah.
happy mug today.
I wish I was that person who started with a really nice tall glass of cold ice water because there are so many health benefits to it, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I had my first cup of coffee at 6 months old because I used to sit on the lap of my southern grandmother. And back in the day, I don't know if they still use them, but those little half bottles,
Mm-hmm.
I got a half bottle of coffee every morning while she drank her first cup.
Wow.
That might explain a lot about me.
I'm not going there. Sorry. I will say though, my kids, when they would be with their grandmother, she would make them little girl coffee, and so we have a little tiny mug that was my husband's, and so it would be mostly milk, but it would be flavored with coffee, and I think that has firmly established their relationship with coffee. So as young adults, it's their go-to beverage.
Oh, wow.
I am a coffeeholic, undoubtedly. I still remember very vividly the day that I received my Starbucks Gold Card in the mail.
Oh boy, I didn't know there was such a thing.
Oh, but there is. And the sad part about it is that one, you can't obtain Gold Card status without the implication of two things. One, a mass consumption of their products, and two,
Right.
a fiscal endowment in their company's security. So when I lived in Columbus, there was a Starbucks a half a mile from my house, and I had to pass it both coming and going. So I would go through the drive-through, both coming and going, on a daily basis. It got to the point where I would pull up in the drive-through, and they would say, "Hi, Bobby,"
Well,
without me even
everybody
saying.
needs a place where
Yeah,
people know your name, right?
I was gonna say I was the norm of the Starbucks on Broad Street in Blacklick. And I remember equally the day that I pulled up and somebody didn't say hi, Bobby. They gave me the traditional salutation. I was like, "What's going on?" And I discovered that all of my barista friends had moved to different locations or on to different opportunities. And I was like, I can't reintroduce myself to all you people.
It's too much work.
I'm a gold card member, for gosh sake. Well, everybody, it is about 2 minutes after 10. So let's go ahead and get started. We do still have people arriving into the room, so please come in and find your virtual seat. But I'd like to welcome everybody to today's edition of Coffee Klatsch with Prevention Action Alliance. For those of you I'm not familiar with, my name is Bobby Persinger, and I'm the Deputy Director here at PAA. And this morning I am joined by Fran Gerbig, our Executive Director, and a very,
Good morning, everyone.
very special guest, Dr. Jill Jackson from the Ohio Department of Education. So this morning we're going to talk about education and prevention and how prevention professionals can support the return to instruction this fall in a couple weeks. Some school districts are currently introducing their return plans, and I've seen everything from a full return in person to a full return virtually, and lots of hybrid models. So I think our conversation this morning will be robust and will be really hearty for us to discuss how prevention professionals and school-based professionals can collaboratively interact with one another so that we can ensure both academic and social emotional success as the 2021 school year opens up. Um, a couple things before we get to the discussion. I would like to point your attention over to the right side of your screen in your control panels. In the materials section, there is a full course load of stuff over there from ODE as well as Ohio Moss. There's some information in there from PAA and even some resources to return to school from the PTTCs. So there's a lot of stuff over there. Please, if you didn't already access it in the reminder emails that you received prior to this morning's conversation, make sure that during our discussion you are clicking on those links and saving them to your data drive so that you have them in perpetuity. They are very helpful documents, and I think that you're going to find them very beneficial. Also, as always, Fran, your colleague and mine, and our good friend James Syfax is operating the behind the scenes processes as our executive producer on the Coffee Klatsch. So if you have any kind of technical difficulties or questions related to anything to do with that control panel, go ahead and just send him a private message in the chat box, and he will be responsive to you in only a way that he can do. Which would oftentimes probably involve humor and levity. And then,
thank you, James.
and lastly, I want to make sure that everybody is aware, and I'm giving you the permission to use that chat box. One of the pillars of this process, these coffee klatches, is that it's interactive, and we would love for all people on the call to join us in the discussion. When we originated these conversations, they were just that, they were conversations. We wanted to ensure that the folks that we are engaging with, the folks that we work with, and all of you out there doing the fabulous work that you're doing have an opportunity to speak to this subject matter. And because we have all been relegated to in-home working and social isolation, it's a really great opportunity to have that networking and be able to engage with other professionals across the state and any experts that may be in the room with us that we just haven't individually identified. All of that being said, I have the wonderful privilege now of formally introducing you to a friend of prevention, a friend of Fran and me, a fabulous human being in her own right, and somebody that if you didn't already know her, you should know her now. Dr. Jill Jackson is a professional who has been in our work, has been doing our work for many, many years. She has served and managed prevention and intervention programs in community-based agencies, the juvenile court system, faith-based organizations, school districts, before and after school programs, summer-based programs, and is currently our best friend at the Ohio Department of Education. She goes into work every day to ensure that the social emotional well-being of students, staff, parents, and communities are always at the forefront of everything that the educational structural system does here in Ohio. She supports over 900 school districts in the state with colleagues in her office and in her space, working on things like bullying prevention, substance use disorder issues, working with trauma-informed care methodologies, and really just taking kind of everything that we as preventionists do in Ohio and making sure that the educational structure in the system in Ohio maintains that first-rate, high-level understanding that social emotional learning is just as important as academic success. And not only is it just as important, but it contributes to academic success. So Fran and I have had the privilege of working with Jill for many, many years. And as I mentioned earlier, if you haven't had the opportunity to meet her yet, we are very happy to give you that introduction today. Jill has walked the walk and talked the talk for over 20 years, and we're really excited just to have her join our conversation in the Coffee Klatsch this morning about how we can engage schools, communities, families, and individuals as they return to school. So do me a favor and officially welcome Dr. Jill Jackson to our conversation this morning.
We're so happy you're here, Jill.
Bobby and Fran, I, of course, am glad to be in good company and glad to have this conversation with our colleagues around the state. So thank you so very much for asking and having me.
It's one of those things that I think we had an idea and we didn't realize how beneficial it was going to be to the field. So we definitely appreciate you joining us on this edition. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have because, as I mentioned in your intro, that you and I have sat at many tables together for not that many years because we're both like, what, 23?
That's right. That's ish, right?
But I can comfortably tell the audience that you were the person for me who got me to realize the connection between that traditional education understanding and prevention science and how important a collaboration with our school districts are way back in the 90s. And it's been that way ever since. So you're kind of my guru when it comes to this connection and this collaboration. So we're excited to have you.
Well, I would even say, Bobby, that our preliminary conversation this week, because for the inside story for everybody, we like to talk about these coffee clatches prior to the actual event so that we're all on the same page and we have a little plan in place. Prevention people like plans. But Jill, just our conversation earlier this week, again, was so rich and educational to me personally. And I've been doing this as longer than I care to think about right now. But, with history and with comes wisdom. And so I just think, any opportunities that we can have to chat and remind each other of, ways to collaborate are valuable. So looking forward to this very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think what we can do is we can really just get that conversation started. So let's start off kind of in the most obvious place. Where do you see, Jill, the intersection or the most accessible intersection between that prevention understanding and the educational constructs that prevention specialists and prevention professionals can work in to better serve school districts around the state?
Awesome question. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Thank you for the question. I think there's a couple places, but where I'm going to start is that given the pandemic and how we're approaching life right now, not only life, but education and also obviously, prevention services is really needing to get a sense of readiness. Where are people? Where are our communities? Where are school districts? I know I've been asked a number of times, especially during the summer months as everyone is in preparation, how are schools providing education? How can we provide our services? What can we do and how can we do it? And so, there's never ever been a silver bullet response, to addressing the needs of everyone, and for sure not during this season either. We just really need to revisit those prevention science and strategies that we've been given, and one of them is readiness. Have a sense of community readiness. In this case, it would be school and community readiness to see where everyone is in relationship to post, COVID, if you will, or only post-COVID as we're talking about going into the school year. So based on your experience over the summer and going in, where are you or where are we as a community? And then using that as a platform to think about how the answer, answering the question of how things are going to be done and how that intersect is going to be addressed, because it's going to be so very different
Mhm.
this time around. Before we had prevention science and we had the brick and mortar, which was far more consistent in how we kind of step through or walk through processes and procedures. But those are really we're going to have the opportunity this time to really probably do something that may be a little uncomfortable, as far as, being creative, or having the opportunity to make those steps and procedures more aligned with what the needs are, in the community, and in particular the school, in ensuring that not only education is provided, but those behavioral health needs are met. So
Mhm.
starting with, again, those conversations like we're having now, and I'm quite sure you said you already had received plans, so I'm quite sure folks have been talking over the summer to get a sense of where their communities are, where their schools are, what approach to education the district is taking, so that they can see how best fit for their services will be for this school year.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. One of the things that I've been noticing, and here in Licking County, um, our school districts are opening, differently, specific to their students. So I think, to your point, Jill, they're probably, the school districts are being responsive that way. They're talking to their parents, to their teachers, and working within the constructs and confines of their district community. And
Mhm.
I think prevention professionals who work within those districts probably, to your point, have to do the same thing. We have
Absolutely.
here in Licking County, we have schools that are doing that hybrid method where, like, 2 or 3 days they're virtual and 2 days they're in person. Our largest school district here just announced yesterday that they're reopening at the end of the month completely virtually.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh,
and, and and I think our school district partners are being very cognizant of the health and well-being, and the new guidelines that we all have to live under. And I think that's important. One of the really great things I think preventionists have in their back pocket is the ability to be responsive,
Mhm.
yeah.
whether it's something small or whether it's a massive, reentry into the school year during a global pandemic. We have the skills, the talents, and the abilities as prevention professionals to be responsive to the situation as it arises. And I think
Mhm.
your point is one that's really smart.
Mhm.
So I think the audience probably is receiving that as well.
Well, I
Right.
think, Jill, your reminder is very helpful because, yes, we do have prevention science behind us as our foundation. And I think we also need to give ourselves grace to realize that we, as professionals, are as impacted as the students we're serving, the families we're serving, the schools and the administrators that we're trying to support. And so let's take a deep breath and let's rely on what we know and the science. So it's chaos is hard to live in. And
Well,
so
I
what we
think
have
that
to do is put structure in our chaos.
Well, I think we have it. And I want to give the
Yeah,
prevention
I agree.
field a lot of credit, and I want to give OMAS a lot of credit. And, we have the strategic prevention framework, right?
Mhm.
So, and what did it tell us, if anything, but to have those community conversations to find out, what were going to be our goals and what was going to be our theory of change, and what did the community need in order for those things to happen. So we have a rich background in the state of Ohio, in which those strategies and that process has been hopefully well embedded, right,
Mhm.
into how we do prevention work. So we need to remind ourselves, like you said, Fran, you're spot on. We have to remind ourselves that we have the tools, and the tools still work, even though it's a different season and or environment. And so how do we have those, or how do we continue those conversations? Hopefully sounds like they've continued over the summer months or even through the spring, as we started the pandemic, that folks stayed connected and continue, and then we'll continue on in the fall, and we'll continue, to adjust. In Ohio, when we think about education, we have education from various types of school districts, everything from suburban school districts to rural communities and school districts to inner city urban. And of course, just saying that, we know like there's vast differences in those community types as well as those districts, as well as even buildings within districts, right? Some districts that are really large, they vary even within the district region. Don't want to leave out our community schools. Don't want to leave out our community schools. Hugely important. And again, at a whole different school type, different typology, and different needs. And so, as our colleagues around the state work in each of those different communities or those different school types, there are different approaches to how you would use that SPIF, or how you would use those strategies and techniques to continue, I'm going to say continue conversations, because I know our folks have been out there doing the work, so I'm not even going to act like this is new stuff, right? But how do we think about continuing to use those strategies and tools given our community types or school type, and then in maintaining those conversations, seeing where there's greatest need. Right now, we really may be thinking about more priority needs, and versus maybe what was being done in previous school years, just given what would be needed to support education during the pandemic, because the needs may have shifted, and talking to either the building principal or the district staff, depending on your role and work in prevention. And there's role and work for everyone. I just, I don't want one to think that if they're prevention specialists that there's less work or opportunity, or your efforts are less noted than maybe someone in leadership. Those connections are needed at all levels to see if you're a prevention specialist. You may be more making connections around the front line, if you will, around what's going on with students and families. You may have that connection versus more an administrative connection about talking about what does the school need or what does the district need to achieve goals. So we can always think about prevention from an organizational perspective as well as an individual perspective, to really see that nexus of need and what's going on not only in schools but in communities. And of course, what that's of course going to vary across the state. So we're excited to have prevention specialists all over the state to really continue to partner with schools in these ways.
Jill, I'm so happy to hear you say that, because it continues that understanding that I've always known and worked with you on. One of the things for me, I can remember as I was transitioning evolving throughout my career, and when I was transitioning out of my school-based prevention work, was right at the beginning, kind of when school districts were introducing the PBIS practices and model and understanding. And to me, that is the clearest and most cleanest entree for prevention professionals into a school building, because the components of the PBIS process overlay perfectly with the principles of prevention science. So for our audience who might be a little unfamiliar with PBS, help us understand that.
Help us understand. Well, first, I'm going to say that I'm extremely excited that PBIS is now required for all Ohio schools. And the reason I'm excited is because, one, having been in the field of behavioral health for my professional career and working with schools, is schools didn't always have a requirement in addressing behavioral health needs. And we know how important not only behavioral health needs are, but environmental strategies are, or what we call school climate. So everything from school climate to behavioral health needs, and then all the way up that continuum, if you will, to school safety. Because if school climate isn't good and behavior needs aren't good, then we may have a safety concern. And so PBIS doesn't necessarily address all of those things, but it does give schools what's called a framework. The reason I really pause there is because oftentimes it's a misunderstanding that PBIS is a program. And it is not a program. It is a framework that really allows schools to look strategically at their behavioral health needs. And it allows them to do that at 3 different tiers of need, very much like we have in prevention science, where we have universal, secondary, and tertiary, or universal intervention and tertiary. So you have the opportunity with PBIS to partner with schools and to meet the behavioral health needs of students at all three tiers. And I think that before, where we used to have a problem where everyone felt like they were fighting for turf and territory, right? Like PBIS allows a framework where we can lay out the needs. Everyone has a place. There is a place not only for prevention specialists, but there's a place for educators, and they're different. And so they complement each other. And we can kind of get rid of this notion of competing interests and competing space around supporting
Mhm.
students in Ohio schools. It gives everyone a space. Prevention specialists, like I used to be in the buildings every day. I'm in the buildings every day, but I'm not in the classroom every day with those students. I had periods of time in which I had with students to provide evidence-based curriculum to help change knowledge, attitude, and behavior, right? But when I was gone, I needed that backup. I needed those teachers to understand
Mhm.
some general tenets of what I was teaching or what I was sharing so that we could maintain those behaviors over time. And so what PBIS does is at tier one allows educators and students and school wide is what we call. So everyone, these are like universal strategies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has 3 to 5 behavioral expectations. And so they are to ensure that we have a safe and supportive learning environment. Those should be driven by data. And
Mhm.
so again, it being a strategic process, it gives the building some data to look out to determine what those 3 to 5 behavioral expectations are. But then again, in looking at data, they may have a more targeted need, or they may need some additional supports that could be provided by a prevention organization and a
Mhm.
prevention specialist. So they would continue to look at their data beyond, in addition to those 3 to 5 behavioral expectations, to say, what more do we need to target? Or what content do our students need to learn to maybe even better display
Mhm.
these 3 to 5
Mhm.
behavioral expectations? So we bring the content, you know what I'm saying? We bring that information that really provides what is needed for behavior, knowledge and skill and behavior change.
Mhm.
So that
Mhm.
and same as at tier two. So PBIS does have activities they do at tier two. It's called check in and check out. However, in addition to check in and check out, there's probably an absolute need, besides students having the opportunity to have that caring adult that they would check in with at the beginning of the day and then check out at the end of the day, but in the middle is where we fit. And we have an opportunity throughout the school day to work with identified students and provide
Mhm.
targeted intervention or programs and services to those students that may have an elevated need for behavioral supports. And then there's tier three. And then in working with the school, I should say, through the implementation of the PBIS process, is to see how schools are working with those tier three students.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that you, as a part of your organization, may have organizational supports for the school and the student and the family, that it could be a referral for tier three students. But there's
Mhm.
always the opportunity with prevention staff that they're a part of an organization that can support students at all three levels of need, or all three tiers of support, if you will. And so it allows the opportunity to support environmental strategies, prevention
Mhm.
strategies, intervention strategies, and family needs and support, or tertiary needs, as identified. So PBIS again is a framework. I think I've said it a couple times. So just in case anyone had a misunderstanding, hopefully we got that one now. And then partnership, partnership, partnership. I can't say
Mhm.
partnership enough, because it's about maybe either the prevention specialist or the ED of the organization, and working with the principal to identify.
Mm-hmm.
Schools should have PBIS teams. So this happens
Mhm.
as a result of a group of folks in the building that are identified as PBIS team members, to work through the framework, have the conversations, look at the data, determine those needs.
Mm-hmm.
Partnerships and how what implementation would look like. And so we need to maybe think about within our prevention space who would be the best folks to inquire about and or be a part of those conversations so they can see how the school is going about addressing behavioral health needs and where they fit, because it's not a space where we any longer should feel competition. It's a
Right.
space that gives us opportunity to continue to partner and better meet the needs of students in Ohio schools and improve behavioral outcomes. There's one more piece I want to add to this, though. Historically, we always said we want to meet the needs of the students, students and students again. And I am for sure a proponent of supporting students. But I would like to add that in addition to identifying behavioral need, 3 to 5 behavioral expectations, and offering intervention strategies and whatnot, PBIS from an educational perspective is first for the adults, be it the teachers or the administrators, because not only, as I shared earlier, is there an expectation that there's a PBIS team that looks at data to identify these things, but first the teachers can model and practice the behavior themselves. And so not a practice in which it is due to, it's a do with. And so there's definitely the mindset of prevention professionals and prevention practices. And so not only is there an opportunity to support the students, there's also an opportunity to support the staff. That is really the direction that we're moving in across the country in prevention science and in Ohio, that we need to, as prevention agencies, not only think about the opportunity to support students, but also to support staff. What PD can we give staff based on the data and what their needs are and what they're talking about is needed to support students? How can we then maybe as the ED of the agency be working with the principal or district leadership or however within your district is set up, is the point person to say, we see that these supports are in place, or we may have a good set of supports in place for students. Everything may be going good, but the missing link may be how can then we provide PD to the adults in the building or staff or anyone who has connection with students. Maybe the students are doing, a really great job and the best they can. However, the adults in the building maybe may need content knowledge shirt up a little better. So PBIS gives the opportunity to address students' behavioral health needs, but again, it's very much inclusive of adults. And we really should make sure that as we think about prevention, we think about both sets of opportunities.
There were so many Easter eggs in that answer that I am loving my life right now, ma'am. Couple things that I caught on to. One, that direct connection between the educational process and prevention science is those tiers, because in prevention speak, that's universal, selected, and indicated. As you said, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that's what was happening in my head, is like, okay, perfect. So somebody who's doing school-based prevention, somebody who's doing prevention in general, understands that language and can go in and speak to those educational collaborators, and they're going to have a sync in their understanding and their knowledge. The second thing that hit me, and we did a coffee Klatsch on it earlier in the summer, was working with the adults. Sometimes we think when we're school-based prevention professionals that our core audience are the students, whether they be kindergartners or whether they be seniors in high school. And to your point, we do have to focus on those kids, and all of those evidence-based curricula that we invest in and utilize is dedicated to informing and educating those students. But we know for a fact in prevention that non-parental adults in a young person's life contributes to the success of that young person. And we know that those non-parental adults in the school building, be they the lunch lady, the principal, the school counselor, the teacher, the janitor, the coaches, all of them fill that role. And being able or having the access to them, to the staff and to the teachers, is just as important as delivering an 8 to 12 session curricula to the student population. And we know that holistic prevention provisions are the most beneficial to
Yeah,
the community.
yeah, most necessary, absolutely.
Hmm. Well,
And then,
at
So
Prevention Excellence Alliance, we like to say everybody has a role in prevention. And so it's our job to help people have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to support that. Because we know that if young people, anybody hears consistent messages, it's a layer. It's, it's supporting each other. It's a reminder of the good choices that they can make and the knowledge that they already know. So I was thinking there, oh, ding, 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 ding. This is great.
our audience
I want
actually,
let me be a little transparent because um, I'm doing this to support us um, because most of us know, you know, schools don't always understand and welcome our work. Can we just be honest about it?
Sure.
It's good company, right? And so, what we do in supporting the adults in the building and the educators and anyone who touches young people is it helps give value
Hmm.
to our work into prevention science. Unfortunately, it's true. We still have to prove ourselves. There's still room in education where, as much as we would love folks to just open their arms and welcome us in and allow room for us to do what we do, that's not always the case, right? And so, and if you're in a community that may be a little more challenged in being as open and as supportive to the prevention work as um, the school could be and could gain value from, helping to provide that professional development really allows also educators to have better knowledge because it's just we can't assume that this is their area of expertise as well. It's not
Oh,
their areas of
sure.
expertise, but we don't always remember that. Their areas of expertise are whatever their instructional areas are. So it really helps get value to our work, the need for us to be a part of the educational process, and then how we can specifically assist and support whatever educational goals there are. So sometimes it's also a matter of making sure that um, we're allowing educators to have an opportunity for growth to better support the work. With that, I'm going to, Bobby, if you don't mind, I just kind of want to add some additional pieces because the state is really, the governor and this administration has done, I need to really give kudos to the support that they have given prevention and for those things that we just talked about to
Hmm.
occur. And so there are currently two pots of funds that are being ministered to support prevention work. The first one, I'm going to lead with OMAS because in Ohio, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services does lead prevention work for the state of Ohio. And so they have been awarded dollars to provide to the county board areas so that all schools K through 12 was what was intended receive prevention education. And so that's huge that the money was allocated so that every student K through 12 across the state of Ohio is receiving information so that we can ensure that we start to address whatever behavioral health needs Ohio students have while in K through 12 education. Huge because that's so necessary for good development, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So Department of Health and Addiction Services is leading that with their board agencies, but the requirement was that, how about this? They had to partner with schools to use that money and had to complete self-assessments
mhm,
to I go back to what I was, your first question, Bobby, you're spot on, what is needed. And so how do they identify that nexus and then determine how best to use those state dollars to ensure that all students receive prevention education. And so it may look like identifying, where are gaps. Everyone's doing something. So we're always
Hmm.
excited to support our schools and our community partners for what's in place and what they've been doing, and we don't want to negate that at all. But then looking to see where maybe there's opportunity for expansion, or again, if there are areas of where students are not receiving prevention education, they can. So again, that is very significant. All schools are going to be doing that. So there may even be a question or conversations, like we had said earlier, not only with your school, but with your board area or with your ED, to see what's going on in your county, what's going on in your districts with the use of those K through 12 funds. The next piece, though, really goes to, so that's ensuring students have, right? But again, the administration was straight on at this time, because they said not only we're giving dollars to students, we're also giving dollars to education to make sure that educators are trained on the model and tenets of prevention. Get out of here, right? Good stuff. Good stuff,
Smart,
necessary
smart,
stuff.
smart.
I started doing this work a long time ago, and that's why, Bobby, you've heard me say for years, it's not only the students that need the support, it is the staff. Half of our
Mhm.
challenges in prevention have not been the students participating, it's getting in the door, right? It's
Mhm.
making sure that schools understand that we're not wasting their time, and that what we have to offer is necessary and beneficial, and you will see outcomes as a result of our partnerships and programs and services we provide. So the governor, again, an administration has allocated dollars, so every educator in the state of Ohio receives this training on the models and tenets of prevention education. That is being led by the Department of Education, and we have educational service centers, 5 across the state, that then will, and I can give you that information, Bobby. I'll share that with you so that you can post it, so folks can have an overview of that grant work, as well as the ESCs that have been identified to work regionally. There's 5 across the state, with the ESCs in their region to train educators on prevention models and tenets. So if you're interested in that, we will make that document available. Please, please, please contact the ESCs that are leading the work to ensure your partnership, because our work also required that partnership, because as educators, beside me, the rest of the educators in the state, their expertise is not as much in behavioral health work. So yes, we are the environment, and those are the conversations I have a lot with my colleagues. Education is the environment, not
Mhm.
necessarily the content expert. So we have to partner with our behavioral health partners to make sure we get the right content into the environment to support the need. And so we are always wanting to make sure locally we do it masterfully at the state level. We work hand in hand, Department of Education and Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, to ensure that we think about how the systems of
Mhm.
prevention need to operate. And so with those prevention dollars for training educators, again, it's about building systems of support, making sure that districts and ESCs have partnerships with behavioral health agencies, board agencies as needed, to make sure that our educators are getting the appropriate prevention one-on-one
Mhm.
training. And then in addition, if you're working in a building, as we were talking about, doing the PBIS work, and that you feel like your educators have that good baseline information of 101, then we can talk about what prevention training they may need in a particular content area or evidence-based practice. So that's how we're building tiers of support now in prevention. We started with talking about data, looking at community need, using a framework like PBIS, looking at where the needs are at each tier, where you fit, not only for students, but also for staff. So as
Mhm.
we think about prevention now, we're talking about systems of support. The Department of Education has supported this notion even more by rolling out a strategic plan that's focused on the whole child. Um,
Mhm.
as a result, the agency really restructured and created an office specifically for addressing the needs of the whole child. It's called the
Mhm.
Office of Integrated Student Supports, and I'm proud to be a team member in the Office of Integrated Student Supports. And in the Office of Integrated Student Supports are the professional staff that ensure the rollout of PBIS statewide. The work that Bobby shared, that I do that addresses all prevention and intervention areas and behaviors legislated or addressed for schools. We then also have a strong focus on what we call vulnerable populations, and that's really based on what's called with its legislated language. But those populations would be students that unfortunately are experiencing homelessness or in foster care, English language learners, and those students that are receiving education or have been adjudicated to the Department of Youth Services. So I say that also, I know I'm giving you a lot, but in addition to looking at the strategic planning processes, because be it SPIF, PBIS, strategic planning processes, and addressing behavioral health needs, as we've talked about in my work of those prevention areas or intervention areas, but you also have an opportunity to think about your vulnerable populations as they are deemed in federal language. But goes back to question number one: what does your community look like? Or my response to question number one. You need to know we need to know our communities, and we know that as a general tenet of prevention work in the SPIF. So do we have vulnerable populations, and what services and supports do those communities, those populations of students need to, which gives you just a work and opportunity, and especially during this pandemic, that those vulnerable populations may be areas where there's new opportunities to support.
Yeah. That's wonderful, Jill. And the audience has been asking lots of questions that I think you were giving them the opportunity to ask. And it actually leads us right to our What's in Your Cup segment. So with the questions that we already have, I'm gonna toss them out there, and anybody please feel free to offer your thoughts. And then if you have any other questions or you have specific questions about your area of Ohio, don't hesitate to put them in that chat box. Jill, one of the first questions that came up was talking about that data that you mentioned earlier. And obviously all of our work, both as educators and prevention professionals, has to be informed by data. But the question kind of takes a turn and asks, how do we maintain that data-driven information when there's burnout, when there's mistrust, when there's misunderstanding in the science specifically? For people in the public health realm, or even just the average everyday person who's trying to understand this pandemic, plus grapple with the idea of how does school resume in any capacity?
My first response is don't stop. So no matter how frustrated you get, or no matter how challenging the terrain may be, we can't stop, because this
Agreed.
too shall pass. First, this too shall pass. We're just kind of right now, in a unfortunate sweet spot. But we're in a spot, right? But
we're in a spot. I'm not sure it's sweet, but it's a spot.
we're gonna make it sweet. We're always about, as the
That's right,
turn in the lemonade. So one, you got to stay steady to the course. Okay. And then you may have to, again, these are things that you have heard before. You have to take small wins. So we have to think about where can we make progress? Who do we have connections with? How can we use the data? It may not be in the way in which was initially intended, or the goals may shift and change. However, just staying consistent, making sure you always look for the small wins, the low hanging fruit, and keep the connections with someone, so that there's not a disconnect, because we don't want a disconnect to occur, because then we fall off and then we get further behind. So make sure that we maintain some level of connection with folks, and that we're able to work through whatever is going on right now, because it's not always going to be optimal, which that is, our end goal. But to get to that optimal state, we have to keep going, we have to stay connected, and we have to continue to work towards small wins.
I
I
love
was
it.
even thinking, Jill, that so much of how we share data depends on the delivery mechanism and then the
Yeah.
person who's delivering it. And so maybe it's not my job to deliver it. Maybe my job is to find a stakeholder in the community who's well respected.
Right, right. And that's what I said, staying connected and finding who
Yeah,
that
and
is.
I think that's just a good
Right.
reminder.
So you remind you have, stay connected with those persons. And so the data piece, data like is a rich opportunity. Data is, and maybe it's a researcher in me, so maybe I'm just not, I'm in a different place with data than other folks. But data really you should try and always look at data as your friend, because it's going to give you, it's like your roadmap. It's really going to
Mhm.
give you the information you need to have that conversation with whoever it is the person that's dealing with data in the building, or in the district, or in the community, or from your agency perspective. It allows you that opportunity to have that piece that Bob talked about earlier, which is where's the nexus. It gives you opportunity to have those rich conversations. So I encourage you to look at it from an asset driven perspective, and really look at it as opportunities to work through where we're at right now. Bobby?
Agreed.
Great. That I'm with you. I'm subscribing to the newsletter right now.
Okay.
One of the things, and I apologize to our audience. In prevention, we love our acronyms. Our partners in education also like them. So thanks to those in the chat box who fully articulated PBIS, excuse me, stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports.
Support. We do
Um,
apologize. It was
yeah,
inappropriate.
we get
I'm
going and it
sorry.
just the acronyms
Yeah.
start flowing, and
Some
and some people
people.
might not know. Um, One of the questions that came into the chat box was talking about, Jill, when you were talking about engaging those adults in the school buildings and throughout the districts, supporting classroom teachers is
Oh yeah.
monumentally more important now maybe than it's even ever been before, because as the chat box is saying, is teachers are still unaware of what their classrooms are going to look like and how they're going to engage with their students and do their piece of this puzzle. So to your point earlier about being able to be supportive and utilizing prevention science to engage the teams of professionals in the buildings is important. Um, the chat box is saying that teachers are got a lot of pressure right now.
Hmm.
So another thing that we've been doing at the Ohio Department of Education is developing the draft framework for is the whole Ohio's Whole Child Framework. And some folks on the call may be familiar with the work that we've been doing recently, but the point of bringing this up is one of the components in the Whole Child Framework. Again, even though it's named Whole Child, we talk about staff self-care as a significant component of what's necessary for education. And so we will start to see more support from the agency for districts to really have this as a part of how education is provided going forward. And this was even started before the pandemic. And so of course we know it's even more necessary now, right?
Hmm.
So again, the shift in the conversation for prevention folks is to know that you have the tools, the skills, the strategies, the key to those behavioral health needs, not only for students, but for staff. And of course, we know for families and communities. So feel encouraged. The only piece is because, you know, you have to learn how we're working in education, and those who work school-based know this. You have to become what I call kind of bicultural, meaning you have your prevention knowledge, but you have to understand how schools work too, and how to dance that dance. And so that we come to that nexus, that piece that you said at the beginning. And so, yes, you have all the keys and tools that are necessary, but it's that how. The how has always been my point of conversation in the field forever, but it's the how. How is that done? What does that look like? What is needed for those things to happen? And those are the tougher questions. Don't necessarily have all the answers, but what I do know for certain is the answers occur in the communities. One of the things that I brought up to Bob and Fran
Oh, I
when we were
love that.
talking, I want to reiterate to this group is this: Ohio in education is a local control state. What that means is in our communities, we vote for local school board members. Those local school board members, along with the superintendent, take federal and state policy and legislation, and they are responsible, the superintendent and the board, for ensuring that districts, each of the districts, over 600 public districts, not including community charter and parochial and non-public, to takes us well over a couple thousand. But each public district for sure and community charter, make sure that they have those policies in place. It is then the superintendent and the school board that then determine how policy is implemented across the state. That's why policy and implementation of education could look very different in one district to the next, neighboring districts, in fact, right? And that will be the case with prevention education. So I know oftentimes my colleagues come to me and say, give me the answer. Give me the one answer that's going to address it all. And I'm like, I can't, ever. That's we're talking about prevention science, and then there's some things. But so know that Ohio's a local control state. And so how you in this busy season support teachers is going to depend not only on each community, not only district, it could be each building. Because the supports are going to look different for our elementary school students versus our secondary grade students. Should look, absolutely should. And so how and only the person that can answer those questions are, again, our local partners in education. And so know that we're a local control state. That really gives the intention is to give more autonomy to local communities, to say, here's what's expected, here's the guidance, here is the big picture and what is to be achieved in education. But how that is done, it's really a matter of local control and local decision. And so that goes back even more. I can't emphasize those relationships, those connections, making sure folks understand prevention a little better, how you have fit, what are their needs, and then how you can support them. We couldn't emphasize more.
Well, Jill, a lot of people are in the chat boxes are thanking you for the conversation on the PBIS process and how aligning prevention with it can really help engage our school partners. I'll share this with you. Our good friend Nicole Schisler threw her name in the ring to be the president of the Jill Jackson Fan Club.
Whatever.
But one of the really great questions that popped up was.
Funds. Tell her I don't have any funds for that, but I do appreciate it.
I'm sure she'll volunteer for the first 5 years. A really great question that did pop up in the chat box is that how do schools know that their staff rather are required to get those trainings that you spoke about earlier?
Well, our communications team at ODE does a fabulous job. All requirements for Ohio schools are probably not going to be known by the teachers. They're going to probably be known by the leadership first. So if you're an ED, they'll be talking maybe at the district level. If there's partnerships in place there, or should be, again, having those conversations, and or with the building principal. So you would need to be talking to district leadership about that more so than the teachers themselves. The teachers themselves are staff folks. They don't always know the federal and state requirements. They're like any employees in any organization. They kind of take the lead from leadership on ensuring, and it's the district's responsibility and the principal's leadership's responsibility that those opportunities are provided and the legislation is met. I don't want to put that responsibility on my teachers. They got enough work to do, right? So just support them in getting the knowledge, but really, if you're having those conversations, they should be happening either with your ESCs in particular, because those are the ones that are charged with providing the training. And so if you're a board agency, oftentimes, or work with your board agency to see how they're working with the ESC. But give our teachers some grace, because it's not their responsibility to know.
They're frontline people in this pandemic situation beyond a shadow of a doubt. Probably we have time for maybe one more question, Jill, that I'll throw at you before our 11 o'clock hour comes up. We've had some questions in regards to those special populations that you spoke about. This question in particular from Amy Smith asks, what can we do to help the young people, those small students that are maybe behind, help them get back on track and work through those other systems that they're a part of, if they're foster care kids, if they're experiencing, as you mentioned, homelessness issues or anything else that might be impacting their school success?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So, um, again, working with the school, you got to see where those populations are. We don't want to assume that every vulnerable population is not meeting academic goals. In fact, one of the things that was really refreshing to know when I attended and participated in the statewide English language learner conference before the pandemic, when you could actually, remember the old world where you could go back and be at a conference, right? And
That's
so
so
in
wonderful.
their plenary, what they did was they showed data that showed that EL students really are achieving, and that there's not the deficiencies that one would assume because they're English language learners. So that was really refreshing to know. So one, okay, so one is to identify the student populations, have the conversations to see where they are, very much like that PBIS framework conversation we had, and then based on that, see within your organization where their needs are. Their needs may actually be treatment level needs, so you may have to do a warm handoff, or there may be in the prevention or intervention space, but seeing what the student population is in your community, what those numbers look like. I really think it's a cool way sometimes. I know that this is surprising, but to bring the needs of this population to educators and administrators, because sometimes we just like to lump everybody together and just do education for all. And there's really a need to really sometimes look more intentionally at these populations, see and ask the questions so that everyone collectively can see what the needs are, and then have those conversations about how we'll disseminate supports.
Hmm. Yeah. Again, good reminder, you have to do the assessment. What are the needs? Where can we be helpful? We can't presume. We just cannot presume.
And it may not be in prevention. It may be in another
Exactly.
area. And that, but we still have what we have good in prevention that I've always hung my hat on since I did this X number of decades ago. We have an organization to support us. We're not just individuals in this work. And so as an
True.
organization, we have a broader span of reach and opportunity to support not only individuals, families, and community.
Hmm.
In schools.
Yeah. Good words to end on, Jill. Thank you.
I hope so. I hope
Thank you
so.
very much.